What's up, everyone? It's Matt Martin with the Grass Factor. So, I'm still playing with the new camera setup. And anyway, I did a couple of presentations at Real Green Solutions 2019 in St. Pete Beach, Florida. And I know not everybody was able to attend, so I wanted to give a scaled down version of what I did there for the YouTube community. And one of the presentations I did was pre-emergence and why they're not working anymore. So when we jump into this, there's a couple things that we need to keep in mind. First and foremost, pre-emergent is going to be one of the most important parts of our successful lawn care program. When we think about pre-emergence, that's our first line of defense for weed pressure, and that's going to give us our big stopping power towards those weeds that ultimately can make or break our reputation with our client. So what we're beginning to face on the professional side of things is that pre-emergents are not working like they originally were. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about why that's the case. We're going to talk a little bit about what pre-emergent herbicide rotation looks like. We're going to talk about adding different active ingredients to our pre-emergent program that are actually post-emergence, but will give us a little bit longer duration and spectrum of control from our pre-emergent herbicides. And we're going to build those into new pre-emergent programs. So I wanted to first show this chart here because this is a nice general overview that gives you a list of probably the most popular pre-emergents on the market and their mode of action. So looking at these, there's one thing that really stands out is that there's a lot of K1 group 3 meiotic inhibitors on this chart. You'll see some on there that are not as commonly used. So for instance, Gallery. We also see SPECTICLE on there, cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor. Interestingly, it's a similar mode of action, has a similar mode of action, but it is not of the same class. So keep that in mind. Some interesting things on here would be sulfentrazone is listed here, which is a PPI, and also SureGuard, which is also a PPI. And if you look at those, they're both group 14. So same mode of action between those two. So here we're going to look at a 4-year UGA trial where they compared a lot of the pre-emergents that are available for the lawn care market. And if we look here, this is dithiopyr, and this is going to be pretty close to what I would say average results would be with dithiopyr. You can see you're in the 80 to 90 percentile range depending on number of applications you make. You see a single application is not as effective as 2 applications, and you see a split application was more effective than a single application as well, even though you do have an overall reduced rate. Here's pendimethalin, also known as AquaCap. Another good one, another yellow herbicide. I know dithiopyr looks more like champagne, but pendimethalin is one of the yellows. Again, another meiotic inhibitor. And we see very similar results here, whether you're using it impreg on fertilizer, or you're using a water dispersible granule. It looks like as long as you get your rates down, you have an acceptable level of control. You see over on the goosegrass side there that, you're only ranging in that 70. Oh, one good time they got in 90%. Overall, more effective on goose than dithiopyr. But when you're talking about 77% control, is that actually considered good enough for a professional? And I would make the argument that no, it is not good enough. Prodiamine here, we've got a single 0.75 pounds of AI. getting 93% control of crabgrass there. And then we get down here to 0.75 in a split application of a 0.25 and a 0.38. And that's a granular application, and you know you're getting 96%, and you're starting to eke up there to 74% on the goosegrass side of things. You see here, Orizolin and benzoylide also tend to be effective. However, not super effective as compared to the others. 93% at full max rate. And 80% at full max rate, and one of them you can't run on cool season turf. So, in my opinion, you can kind of throw those out. So, these are all root and shoot inhibitors, DNAs, right? Dinitroanilines, dinitroanilines. They're soil applied, they create a vapor barrier in the soil, and they work by inhibiting the cell division. So if you ever hear of clubbed roots in a pre-emergent, this is what they're talking about. DNAs will club the roots. And all of these products that you see here are going to be in the same group. Treflan, Balin, Surfland, Pendulum, Aquacap, Prowl, all the same thing. Barricade, Dimension, they're all group 3. With them being all group 3, that means we're going to be running into issues because effectively we're applying the same mode of action to the same groups of weeds over and over and over and over, because these are arguably the overwhelming majority of the crabgrass control products we have on the market, which is scary. And that kind of brings me into why you're beginning to see less and less efficacy. If we look at the global increase in unique resistant cases from the year 2000, even the year 2010, to now, we're getting exponential increase in overall instances. This is beginning to become an issue. And here we'll look at the individual types of groups that are creating a lot of these instances of resistance. So we see here at the top our ALS inhibitors, or sulfonylureas. If you're not familiar with the sulfonylurea, if you've ever run metsulfuron, halosulfuron, sulfosulfuron, trifloxysulfuron, forumsulfuron, nicosulfuron, all of these products have the same mode of action, an ALS inhibitor. And as you can see, the number of species of weeds that have grown resistant to it is high off the chart. Then, number 2, we have our PSI inhibitors. So these are going to be things like atrazine and simazine. Used to, you could apply atrazine or simazine as a pre-emergent for POA annua. And then it stopped working, and then you would transition to using simazine as a post-emergent on POA, or atrazine as a post-emergent on POA. And then that began to stop working, and so then you would decrease your volume. So I would run atrazine at low volume and still get control of POA. But even then, it stopped working. So now you almost have to use it as a kicker as part of a broadleaf weed control program. Or if you're dealing with St. Augustine or centipede, using atrazine when it's warmer outside to control broadleaf weeds. Next down on the list is going to be our PPO inhibitors. This is going to be sulfentrazone, octane, carfentrazone, which is quicksilver. Octane is pyroflufen ethyl. SureGuard, SurePower. You can see there's a high number of instances here where these are actually issues. And then we have our DNAs, our K1. If we look down there, somewhere around 10 resistant species of weeds to our DNA. So even though at one time we might have gotten control with using prodiamine or dimension, we will no longer get control because the weed has developed resistance. So I know there are guys out there that are using Specticle. What does that mean? What does your program look like if you are using Specticle? It's good, and the reason why is that currently there is no I'm going to come down here with it. There is no known instances of resistance to Specticle, which is fantastic, right? It's a group 29. It's a cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor. It is very, very powerful. Isoxaben and quinclorac. Quinclorac has some activity on non-dicot weeds, right? So if you notice, it'll have activity on both grassy weeds and broadleaf weeds, right? Specticle takes all the goodness of those products, but really ramps it up. And as a result, it does a very good job in preventing weeds. Now, one of the issues is that you can't use it on cool season turf, and it can be phytotoxic. And that's not just towards cool season turf. It can be phytotoxic towards warm season turf. So it's just one thing to keep in mind as you're using it. The phytotoxic research was done. Phytotoxicity research was done at the University of Florida, where you're dealing primarily with St. Augustine and centipede. So there they were able to monitor things such as foliar injury, shoot and root biomass decreases, and root morphology. That would be the clubbing or lack of development in the roots. And that would occur in soil or sand with or without organic matter present. So you would think that if you have a higher instance of organic matter, it would create a better buffer towards fighting the phytotoxic effects of something like Specticle Flow, but unfortunately it's just too powerful and could not do that. So I got to learn how to use PowerPoint because I don't know. What do we do? That's it. We're done. We got nothing. Just kidding. I don't know why I put this into a presentation. I was really sleep deprived apparently when I did that. So when we talk about programs and what we can do to rotate our products, we start analyzing what we have available on cool season turf. We can introduce tenacity into our program as herbicide rotation. We can introduce ProGrass as an herbicide as part of our herbicide rotation. We could do a post-only application. So we think about fluazafop, which is over the top, also known as Fusilade 2. It can be run as a post-emergent and does a fairly good job of controlling things like crabgrass. Phenoxyprop, same thing. Acclaim or Last Call has phenoxyprop in it. Does a good job. Tenacity or Pilex or quinclorac can be used as post-emergents. You can combine things like Pilex and quinclorac or Pilex and even tenacity and have good efficacy on controlling those hard-to-control grassy weeds. On warm season turf, rotating with things like SureGuard. SureGuard will probably need to be utilized more and more in programs on warm season turf. Specticle, rotating things that are DNAs with a product like Specticle. Pennant Magnum. Again, this would be a pro approach. Pennant can move into waterways really easily, so make sure you pay attention very carefully to the rules, restrictions, and limits of the herbicide Pennant. Atrazine and simazine. Again, you're not necessarily going to get 100% control with a product like atrazine or simazine, but building it into a pre-emergent program as a tool in the toolbox, it may increase overall efficacy. So let's see what it looks like in a program. Okay, here we go. I love this example right here because this looked really identical to what I did when I worked for corporate companies. So we see first round 1 and 2, pendimethalin, followed by pendimethalin and simazine. And then we start moving into the fall. We shut that Bermuda grass down with atrazine. In fact, I think I even ran something similar to this when I was in Georgia. Round 6, run atrazine, 7, prodiamine, 8, simazine. And this looks good, right? So we run that the first year. Then the second year, we switch it up. We run prodiamine first round. Second round, we run dimension and simazine. Round 6, we run prodiamine. Round 7, we run prodiamine. And round 8, we run atrazine. This looks very typical, and you can see here there's some switching that's going on. Round 1, we lean heavily on pendimethalin in the spring. Round 6, 7, and 8, we're relying heavily on our Group 5 herbicides in the fall with a little bit of kicker from the prodiamine. Year number 2, early rounds, we're rotating. We're running prodiamine and dimension. And then in the fall, we're relying heavily on prodiamine. This is not how to cycle your herbicides. This does not work. You are repeating the exact same program year over year because you're using the same groups over and over. Let's look at something that is more effective on warm season. So we have that same year 1, and then year 2. Look, round 1, we're going out with SureGuard. Round 2, we're going out with Specticle. Round 6, Specticle. Round 8, ethifumicate. Cool season, guys. We are so screwed on cool season because there is not enough technology out there. And I'll give you this example right here. Look, round 1, year 1, prodiamine. Round 2, year 2, dimension. We're switching it up. Round 6, we're putting down tenacity. Round 6, year 2, we're putting down Pylex and quinclorac. That is rotating, right? Wrong. In the spring, we're running group 3. In the fall, we're running group 28. That is not rotating. So let's see what that would look like actually employing a real rotation. Here we go. Round 1 and 2, we've got ethifumicate. 3, 4, and 5, sulfentrazone. So you can see the groups have completely changed year over year. We are not cycling the same modes of actions over and over. Here comes the million-dollar question. Does it work? Of course. Yes, it does. But when you're going here, it's important to keep your post game on point because early on, herbicide rotation was the big push. However, what is changed is the push is going to be combining modes of action. So we look at things that we combine with prodiamine to extend the duration, extend the spectrum of control. So prodiamine plus sulfentrazone, prodiamine plus sulfentrazone plus simazine, prodiamine and trifloxysulfuron, Monument, prodiamine, trifloxysulfuron, and metribuzin, Syncor. You can see where adding these in will help broaden the spectrum of control of prodiamine. And what happens by broadening your spectrum of control of prodiamine is that you allow fewer weed seeds to pass through that application to potentially pass on your resistant varieties. You're combining things like sulfentrazone or SurePower with something like carfentrazone or dicamba, Vanquish on residential lawns while you still can, or ethifumicate. It's important to understand each chemistry is going to have a certain set of advantages and a certain set of disadvantages. So it's important to identify the strong suits and the weaknesses when choosing which one you're going to go out with. Some post-emergent weed controls have pre-emergent qualities. Quinclorac, especially when combined with something like Pylex, tenacity, ethifumicate, sulfentrazone, SureGuard. One thing to keep in mind is that the percent AI of flumioxazin in SurePower is not high enough to have pre-qualities. Sulfonylureas, especially applied as blanket applications, can have long residuals in soils. Now, if you are in an area where you have higher pH, you will have longer control, longer efficacy. If you have lower acidic pH, you will have less efficacy, less duration. Keep that in mind. So, combining those chemistries with something like prodiamine or Specticle with something with a blanket application of Katana or Solero or Manor, MSM, Certainty, Monument, all of those do good. So I talked about rotating herbicides, but the push will be to combine modes of actions. And so I'm going to cite this study here by the University of Illinois on 105 farms. When using an average of 2.5 modes of action per application, fields were 83 times less likely to have herbicide-resistant weed populations compared to 1.5. That is gigantic. Adding one more mode of action meant 83 times less likely to have resistant weeds. That's huge. Tank mixing herbicides for each application was by far the most way to manage that. So we look here, we're looking at what combining herbicides looks like and rotating looks like. So your number one, pendimethalin. Combining something like Monument with dicamba, with sulfentrazone, with Syncor. That is a gigantic guarantee of control on what you're applying. They're around 7. This is actually a very popular mix. Prodiamine, simazine, and MSM. That's 3 modes of action. That's a very powerful application. Year number 2, you can see how you can rotate into this. Round 1, SureGuard, or round 1 could be glyphosate and dicamba. Round 2, Specticle. Round 6, Specticle, and then close out the year with ethofumicate. That's a great example of combining herbicide technologies with pre-emergent qualities with pre-emergent, and then using that to rotate into round 2. Again, I know the cool season guys, y'all. We're all in this together, okay? So, year number 1, prodiamine. Round 2, prodiamine, sulfentrazone, and 3-way. That's a great tank mix combination that a lot of people are already doing. And you will notice you'll get that better control using a tank mix like that than you would be if you went out with just prodiamine alone. Year number 2, look at this, dimension, and then dimension and carfentrazone, 3-way, triclopyr, and ethofumicate. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 modes of actions there. That is going to be a relatively expensive tank mix, but that is going to be a very broad spectrum of control. Round 2 of year number 2 right there, you're probably going to do a good job of catching a lot of POA annua in that tank mix. So while it may be expensive, that may be something that helps you close the deal, close the sale with potential customers. And then moving into round 6, you could switch into something like Pilex, quinclorac, and triclopyr. Those are 3 modes of actions. The big catch, it costs money. I get it. I understand. It's going to cost money, and it's going to be a hard thing to do, especially when we talk about scaling businesses. You have to pay very close attention to how your employees are mixing tanks, how cognizant they're being about making sure they're mixing very accurately. This is going to require a lot more organization to function this way. However, the problem is that we are a subculture of agriculture. And if we do not do things like this, we will be the ones that get punished. Agriculture is now trying to make that shift. We should be making that shift with them. By failing to do so, we're going to be caught in a position where they're going to begin taking herbicides away from us, but keeping the farm label because farms feed us. Turf is luxury. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video today and wanted to talk a little bit about that and give you some examples of how we should be approaching our pre-emergent programs. Now, here's a big kicker to this whole thing. When you're talking about developing a pre-emergent program, is this something, do you have to go this extreme? No, you probably don't. In fact, once you get your lawns to a certain level, you could probably forgo a lot of your pre-emergent applications. However, when you're coming out and you're picking up new lawns that are extremely thin and you need to do something to get them into shape quickly, these programs may be an option for you. If you're running into a situation where you're having a continually weedy lawn year over year over year, this may be the type program you want to shift to. However, if you can build density in a lawn, it makes sense to attack it from a post-only position. Now, I understand certain markets are going to be different. Florida, you probably don't want to have a year where you go post-only. Parts of the transition zone where half the lawns die every summer from heat alone, you probably don't want to go about a post-only program. But if you're in the Midwest or you're in an area of the country where you typically just aren't that weedy because of whether it's dry during certain parts of the year, I can think of lawns in Memphis that I'd never needed to put pre-emergent on, mainly zoysia grass, that if I could maintain zoysia being of a certain density, I knew I would not have to deal with weeds in them. So we have to exercise a certain level of discipline and a certain level of responsibility that goes along with all this. I'm not recommending we go out and we just start dumping tons and tons of chemicals in the tank and go and spraying willy-nilly. Make sure if you are doing that, you're doing it with a purpose and with an understanding of why you need to be doing that, and that the tank mix you are putting together is going to solve the issue you're facing. All right, everyone, if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button, comment down below, and tell me whether or not you enjoyed this. All right, everybody, I appreciate it. Take it easy.